and welcome to Cafe DC. I'm Faz Rahman. We're going to discuss a few issues today with a very prominent, distinguished scholar, an American of Pakistani origin, who is working as an analyst and a scholar at the Middle East Institute. Dr. Zubair Iqbal is with us today. He has worked for more than 32 years at the IMF as a deputy director of Central Asia and the Middle East. I guess so. You bring here a lot of wealth of information and knowledge from that region. Welcome to Cafe DC. Dr. Iqbal, my first question is about this BSA, which is the bilateral security agreement with Afghanistan,
right?
That the Western powers, especially the United States, wants to have in place before they withdraw next year. There are reports that either it's going to be a complete withdrawal or the United States wants to leave a few thousand troops on the ground there. Why it's so important for the Western powers, especially the United States, to have this agreement in place before they depart Afghanistan?
Well, you see, you have to look back at experience in Iraq. The primary objective from the point of view of the United States and the Allied forces, the ISAF, is to ensure an orderly transition in the Afghanistan society and the economy to a self-sustaining environment. And that would require gradual transition in which you strengthen the armed forces to ensure that they are able to look after the vital interests of the state and to preserve its integrity, number one. And number two, ensure that economic conditions are such that the country can continue to grow and provide employment and other opportunities for a rapidly growing population of Afghanistan over the medium and long term. That basically means a commitment of two kinds. One is that of a substantial number of soldiers, which will provide training as well as strategic support for the Afghan forces to ensure that they acquire over a period of time full capacity to be able to handle these challenges on their own. Number two is the transfer of resources that takes place from these countries to supplement domestic resources in Afghanistan for them to grow, so that they can reach a stage where they do not have to depend upon extraordinary assistance from the rest of the world for them to grow.
Dr. Iqbal, the Afghan war has been the longest running war for the United States. And by the time the United States is going to withdraw, it's going to be over 13 years in that region.
That's right.
So why they didn't think about all those measures that you just talked about, that they want to have a good transition to a full-fledged sovereign Afghan government? I mean, they have a sovereign Afghan government, but without the presence of these foreign troops. But why they didn't prepare the grounds before? Why this BSA now, that in terms of course, it has lots of other elements as well, but the smooth transition part, why didn't it start earlier?
Well, you see, to say that the war has been going on for 13 years is probably an overstatement. The reason is that for a considerable period of time, after the first attacks in 2001 and 2, the war came to some sort of a stable level, very low level kind of involvement. The real war actually began 3 or 4 years after that. And it happened after the Iraq war itself. The point is, initially, it was never thought about as to what will be the objective in Afghanistan. The primary objective initially was, how do we get rid of the terrorists? How do we get rid of the Al-Qaeda? And to make sure that Afghanistan is no more a breeding ground for that kind of activity. However, after what happened in Iraq and Iraq's experience, it became quite important to see, look, you don't leave a country without establishing the foundations.
The nation building also became part of the agenda.
Nation building, in fact, became part of the broad agenda after experience in Iraq, which is inevitable. I mean, this is natural, something like this would happen. Initially, the purpose was not that. The initial purpose was primarily to get rid of the people who and the forces which were supportive of the 9/11 event.
Dr. Bal, since you mentioned Iraq, it's interesting that the Iraqi foreign minister went over to Afghanistan and pleaded with President Karzai and asked him to sign it, and he basically declared that the Iraqis didn't sign it, right? So it was a mistake for the Iraqis to not sign a BSA with the United States before they left the country. Why? I mean, if it's so obvious that it's in the interest of not just the nation itself, but also the region and the international community, what are the reservations?
It's in the eye of the beholder. However, you can see three very basic issues which tend to rankle President Karzai and his supporters. One of those is what will be the role of the US forces that will be left behind there, number one. Number two, will they be subject to the laws of Afghanistan, or will they remain subject to the US and other countries' laws? Number three was the point, to what extent can these forces and the countries supporting these forces be able to bring the Taliban around to work out a treaty, a negotiated solution to the problem, so that peace can be primarily dawn on Afghanistan. Now, these three issues are in the eye of the beholder. From the point of view of the allied forces, the ISAF, they are not major. First of all, continuous process is going on to talk to the Taliban. There have been various processes, there have been parallel arrangements and parallel processes of talks, in which not only Afghanistan has been involved, but also some of the Arab countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and of course Pakistan. The point is, it's an issue of perception. What do you consider as a minimum that is required to put the process through? It takes two to tango, as they say it. The United States alone cannot force the Taliban to come to the table. If they have to do that, then they'll have to use much more force than they have used so far, and they're not willing to do it because of the human cost and the economic cost associated with that, and they're counterproductive. Second issue is, should the Afghan law apply to the non-Afghan forces there? That's a very difficult thing to do, because experience has shown that if you are almost like an occupation army, or you are an external force, your means of discipline and management requires that there should be only one process through which decisions be taken and implemented. If you make them, the soldiers, subject to the Afghan law as well as the US or other allied laws, then it breeds confusion, number one.
It would
number
be more
two,
chaotic. And
it creates a very serious logistical problem. So you cannot implement it effectively. I concede there is a problem with regard to recognizing the Afghan sensibilities, especially with respect to the respect for the family or the house, which is a castle for them. And you do not go in that without being invited.
Basically, those were the questions the more publicly expressed. His reservations were to do with the raids on Afghan houses, and then others like drone attacks. Those were the issues he raised very publicly, and then he kind of kept on changing the goalpost, so to speak.
Yes.
That became a little bit problematic as well. Moving on.
But I may try to explain something on this, and that is, you see, there is an unstated tension there. The tension relates to how much of resources will continue to be transferred from the United States and other allied countries to Afghanistan, and over what period. Underlying much of the tension is what happens when this BSA comes to an end. And within the BSA, what will be the role that will be played by the allied forces to proceed towards quote-unquote non-military but social and economic objectives.
Dr. Saab, we'll take a short break here. BSA is not just a bilateral issue between the United States and Afghanistan. It has a serious, enormous regional implications and ramifications, including Pakistan and India. So after we come back, from this break, we'll talk about the regional implications of BSA and also U.S.-Pakistan relations. We'll be right back. Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. Matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC every week only on PTV World. Welcome back. Dr. Saab, we were talking about BSA, and now let's get into the regional implications. India, China, and Pakistan have expressed support for the BSA, and they basically have asked the Karzai administration to sign this. Why do you think it's important for Pakistan? Don't you think there are some forces in Pakistan who are also nervous that if America leaves behind these troops, they think it's not good for the region? But
well, let me counter this. The point is, supposing the United States were to withdraw immediately, what consequences does it have? That's, I think, a more important point, and then we can look at the counterfactual. The point is the following. Supposing the United States were to withdraw at the end of 2014, completely lock, stock, and barrel, it has very fundamental implications. Number one, the Afghan economy collapses, which means there will be a very large movement of Afghans, unemployed, underemployed, and with their families back into Pakistan the way they were in the pre-2001 period. Number two, remember that the movement of forces and the goods and services that they require through Pakistan for the armed forces in Afghanistan implies very significant economic effects in Pakistan. At this moment, at least 25,000 Pakistani drivers alone are fully employed, along with their trucks and their trailers, to move goods and services.
But which has been problematic already. I mean,
but
you
the
see all
point
these
is,
protests.
supposing it comes to a complete halt. And also at the same time, there are about 100,000 workers in Karachi working at the docks who benefit from this. If you were to assume about 150,000 people directly being affected, and if each one of them has a family of 5, you're already talking about something like 750,000 people.
So basically what you're connecting the dots here. I mean, if the troops are going to remain there in Afghanistan, the supply route will continue to stay open,
in one way
and
or
then
the other.
the jobs in Pakistan.
Very much so. And then on top of it, I think which is very important is, once Afghanistan becomes unstable, its political and strategic implications of Pakistan are very severe. Pakistan has its own problem. Under those circumstances, chaos in Afghanistan spilling over into Pakistan and the rest of the region will create a crisis that these countries will not be able to handle. And if they're going to handle it, they will become involved in the conflict. Once they get involved in the conflict, they have to say goodbye to basically their own national objectives and interests. So my point is, it is in the interest of countries like Pakistan to ensure an orderly transition. BSA provides mechanism for orderly transition. You could say it could have been a better agreement. Yes, perhaps. But then agreements are worked out on the basis of give and take. Maybe this is what is which is feasible, that others are not feasible. So you have to look at it from the point of view of what's the reality. What's the reality? And this is the reality. Under these circumstances, what you need to do is to ensure stability on your western border. Make sure that there is no untoward economic consequence. Number 3, do not assume that there will not be increased movement of poor Afghans into the country.
Another refugee problem.
Another refugee problem. And the rest of the world is not in a position at this moment, relative to what it was in the 1980s and 90s, to be able to take care of it. So they will be on your hands. You will have to bear them. That's very, very expensive. Is it in our interest? No.
I think, to be fair with Pakistan, Pakistan has been very adamant about this BSA, and they have come out clearly in support of this. Of course, there are some political parties who don't like the idea, which is just perfectly okay. Why China is, do you think, in favor?
Well, look, China is the new power in the region, as well as on the world level. China is very critically interested in accessing precious metals, natural resources, and access to the markets, not only just Central Asian market, but also Middle Eastern and other markets. Afghanistan provides a very critical vehicle for that purpose. And therefore, the Chinese interest is not only a regional interest because they want to have safety, security, peace along their borders and in the region, but also how to make use and exploit the resources over there for themselves as well as for the countries concerned. So it's in the mutual interest of China and countries like Afghanistan to have China more deeply involved, number one. Number two, on a strategic level, if China gets involved in that area, China's commitment increases to ensure stability and peace in the region. So it's very important for China as well as for the rest of the world and the countries in the region to have closer relations. And this is one of the reasons why China is supporting a version of BSA, which would be watching their interest.
I think it's going to be very complicated. I mean, on the one side, you see China, which has some competing interest with India.
Yeah.
India is also interested and wants to have a good foothold in Afghanistan, come 2014. And then we have Pakistan. But Dr. Iqbal, another very important stakeholder in the region is Iran.
Yes.
Which borders,
Yes.
with Afghanistan, and it's lots of interest.
Yes.
Why do you think what's happening there?
Look,
And especially after these...
the point is, Iran's strategic interest is consistent with the strategic interests of the allies and the Chinese at this moment. They don't want instability there either. They are also interested in the Central Asian market. Remember, Central Asia at this moment is not too different from the way Europe was when, after the Second World War, when they started the steel and coal community, which was the precursor to the development of the European Union. It's a region which is calling for increasing economic integration and closer collaboration. Iran is interested in that. It's in the interest of Iran.
Iran, Pakistan, India, China, all these
countries and Central Asian countries. The point is, Central Asia is the least exploited region in the world when it comes to natural resources. They've got very good resources, natural resources, and they've got very good human resources. They've got markets, and those markets are expanding. It's in everybody's interest. A global network which links Central Asia with the rest of the world through access to the warm waters, if you want to put it that way, will be a great thing. If China can provide this mechanism whereby a trans-China Central Asia railroad can link all these countries, then it provides greater economic security. But remember, which is even more important, which people haven't really paid too much attention to, wars and instability declines where economic interdependence increases.
True.
Europe has not seen a single conflict ever since this coal and steel community was established and the European Union was established, because economic integration meant interdependence, and interdependence meant creation of interests which want to preserve that kind of interdependence as well as growth and well-being for everybody. That's the kind of a thing which can happen in the region if there is peace in Afghanistan. And this is the way Iran would look at it too. Central Asian countries are clearly looking at it that way, and China would definitely play a dominant role. And we can see Chinese and the Russians are not averse to this at all. Their close rapprochement right now between China and Russia, the reopening of closer relations, boils down to that. It then links into the strategic interest in the Pacific. If the Chinese and the Russians and the Central Asians with other countries do this...
Dr. Saab, before we move to a narrower focus of this topic, your quick prediction.
Yeah.
Is he going to sign it?
Yes. Of
How
course.
soon? Before?
Well, as I said, there is a negotiations going on a parallel track. These negotiations have 2 or 3 very critical variables underlying them. One of those is the size of the American forces. Number 2, the economic resources which will be transferred and over what period of time. Number 3, what's the degree to which these forces will remain independent of the Afghan law. What I see is that there will be a significant movement towards it by the end of January, early February. And then, yes, the agreement will in all probability be signed before the next election of the president in Afghanistan.
Well, Dr. Saab, like I said, before we move on to our next segment, let's take a short break here. And after we come back, we'll talk about US-Pakistan relations and how that's going to play out after the withdrawal and what goes through between these two countries before we get to that stage. We'll be right back. Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. Matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC every week only on PTV World. Welcome back. Dr. Saab, we were talking about BSA and then, of course, Pakistan. My focus now is on US-Pakistan relations. Let's see. There are issues between these two countries. We have a very pragmatic Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who is business friendly, who is also trying to mend fences across the border with the Indians. I mean, he's been here. So, what do you think is going to happen BSA after the BSA is signed and the Americans leave? Would the Americans see enough cooperation from the Pakistani government and all of its components, including the military, which can help sustain this improvement in the relationship?
Look, the problems that started to emerge was the mistrust that was created after 2011 between the two countries. There has to be a mechanism whereby the rules of the game should be very clearly defined, both for the United States and for Pakistan, so that both sides know exactly what kind of a page they are on. At this moment,
do you think they haven't been defined
no,
yet?
Not yet. The process is on, but it hasn't been defined as yet. The point is, where do our interests intersect with each other? US interest clearly is to preserve whatever gains they have acquired in Afghanistan, to make sure that the terrorist activities come to an end, and they would like to force Pakistan to move aggressively on dealing with it in its part of the region. They would also at the same time like to see Pakistan playing a better role, for example, in working out with India the issues that exist. Because remember, India and the United States have a strategic
But the Pakistan's point of view being, I mean, they've been trying to basically, you know, like I said before, mend fences with the Indians.
Yeah.
But the Indians haven't been that responsive.
It
That's
depends.
their position.
Look, it's in the eye of the beholder. The problems lie on both sides. It's quite clear Pakistan is a smaller country. And being a smaller country, it's going to be more insecure. The point, I agree, I take it, that Indians ought to do more than what they're doing because they're not only able to do it, but the long-term interest is much more for them if they were to work out this relationship with Pakistan where issues are resolved, or at least they're put into cold storage. The issue from our point of view with regard to US-Pakistan relations when it comes to India is, should Pakistan play a subservient role when it's the American-Indian interest that's a matter of interest? That's where the problem is going to be.
Of course, Pakistan is not going to accept
Not going to
that.
do that. And then
we can't blame them
yeah.
for that.
And then at the same time, you have to look at China. China's close relations with Pakistan clearly have an issue why India is rankled. What you need to do is politics is going to be there. Internal dissensions and tensions and conflicts are going to be there. But the longer term interest of these two is the same. They're not going to disappear.
But do you see such indicators in Washington here that they somehow want to compromise Pakistan's interest in this deal?
The question is, how do you define that interest? Look, Pakistanis view their relations with the United States from a different prism than the United States does. Yes, we have a common interest on preserving sovereignty, integrity of Pakistan, and to make sure that the tensions disappear, and that's where things like drone attacks and other quote unquote extra sovereign activity is considered wrong and needs to be stopped. That's the view of the Pakistanis. On the other hand, the Americans think in a different way. The point is the interests that intersect are security, regional interest, and economic growth. To what extent can the United States help a country of 180 million people grow fast in an environment where it is a nuclear state, a nuclear power, and Americans have to be interested and concerned about that. In the case of Pakistan, their interest is this is an issue of no discussion. It's a constant, it's given. You have to go on beyond that.
Dr. Saab, one major complaint from the Pakistani side has been that they've been unfairly asked repeatedly to do more and more to improve the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. If you just ask the other side this question, what the Americans can do more to help this relationship? We know what Pakistan, I mean, you just outlined those points. What the Americans can do?
See, the point is, at this moment, it's the question of priorities and American interest. The American interest, the most important American interest right now is to get rid of Al-Qaeda and other terrorists from that region. Eliminate their power to be able to threaten the mainland and the allies. In that, they find that perhaps Pakistan is not willing to go as far as they would like it to go. My feeling is that once the BSA is signed, and once you have come to a different quote-unquote slate or a page on which you're going to work out your arrangement, it becomes easier. Even at that stage, the drone attacks may not be as common and needed as they are at this moment or were needed in the past.
Dr. Saab, I wanted to talk to you about the IMF relationship with Pakistan, its second tranche and stuff, but sorry, we are out of time.
Well, I mean, it's very simple. I can give you a very simple answer to that.
Just 10 seconds, please.
Yeah. The point is, Pakistan's interest is to have a certificate of good behavior from the IMF. Once that happens, the market strengthens for Pakistan, and that helps Pakistan economy. And that is what has happened. Pakistanis have taken some reasonable measures. The economy has started to stabilize. The IMF is doing its bit. So I would expect the market to take it in a positive way.
Very good. Well, we'll end this program on this positive note. And thank you very much for watching Cafe DC. And thank you, Dr. Saab, for being with us here.
My pleasure.